without further ado, I want to bring up our first instructor. This is Brian Benedict. He's retired from Richmond Fire and the regional manager for Police and Firemen's Insurance. Please welcome Brian.
So when Nick asked me a few months ago if I would kick this thing off, I spent the last 3 months actually trying to figure out what would make the biggest impact within 1 hour. And something that's near and dear to my heart is building a business of you. And why do I say that? Is because the fire service has became a business. And it looks like a service, but it has become a business. And if you disagree, ask a medic. It has become a business. So we have to change our thinking a little bit, and we have to become a business. Okay? One of the things that I see in the last 20 years of being on the fire department, and then the last 2 years of traveling out throughout the Midwest, is the similarities of fire departments and the struggles they have within the cities. Okay? We train skills. We train to save our life, our buddy's life, and someone within the community's life. The sad reality is that it doesn't increase our wages. It doesn't increase working conditions. It just saves lives, which is great. But if we're a business, we have to treat ourselves like a business. And it's kind of interesting when you start thinking about it that way, because what do businesses do? You know, years ago I played a lot of music, and so I would play in music little solo gigs at the Chamber of Commerce, and they'd have different social gatherings at young professional clubs, where you had people under the age of 39, I believe. And so, how does this relate to a fire department? Well, the more I was there, the more I realized, man, this is where people are meeting. This is where they're connecting. And the bottom line is, it's all about influence. It is, you see, every time you go to one of these meetings, you see the people rubbing elbows, connecting with people, and they're building the business. What happens is, and that's what we were talking about just a little while ago, me and Nick, was that what happens, and it's consistent across the United States, I really believe this, is that sometimes we're strangled by our own tradition. And one of the things that I see is that we wait until we get into a position, say a union board, administrative position, before we think, now's the time we need to start talking and communicating with city leaders. Okay? It's definitely is an impact that you guys have to start today, because it builds, the relationships are what's important. Nick is finding that out when he travels all across this United States and does all these things with Sinclair, with the hospital. It's all about relationships. And we spend 99% of our time training, which is great, on life-saving skills. And we have teams with hazmat, we have teams with diving, we have teams with rope rescue. We pay into PAC a lot of times. But we're relying on union boards and people that reach those positions when really it's too late when we have seniority. It's too late when we have time. Because it's those decisions that these city councils are making, and you can see it if you look at Firehouse Magazine, you look at Fire Rescue 1, you can see some of the turmoil that's going on with contracts. And the reason, I believe, is when you're watching a city council meeting, when you're watching a board of works, when you're watching these trustees, those decisions, they're not made in front of the camera. Those decisions were made years ago because this guy knows him personally from all the times that he's built his character. And so, how does that relate to this book that you guys have, that I wrote? Basically, here's the bottom line, is that in my 50 years and you guys too, you know that there's people out there that have it. And you kind of wonder, well, how do they have it? How does somebody that is not a chief or not in an authoritative position, why do people listen to this guy? And that's what I wondered the same thing. You know, when I was in the Army, there's plenty of people to tell you what to do, but who do we actually listen to? I forget the guy's name, but I called him MacGyver because he was the person that we'd be in the field and he could make fire from nothing. You know, I mean, he was just one of those guys, and he was a private. But for some reason, everybody would listen to him, what he said, and they wanted his opinion. You know, basically, the fire service. There's guys I know because they're listed. Some of these guys are listed in this book that doing this police and fire insurance job. I was a rep for this Dayton, Ohio area and East Central Indiana for the last decade. There's guys inside of these departments down to the stations that are influential, and it doesn't require them to have rank. Some of them do. Some of them are chiefs, but some of them are recruits. They just have influence. And so after I had a few couple shoulder surgeries right in a row, which was unfortunate, but it gave me a lot of time to think about stuff. And this is one thing that came to my mind, is the importance of influence within the fire service, because it is a business. And when you see the influence within these stations and shifts and departments, you think about it, what do they have? What does this guy have? Why is people listening to him? One of the things that we had in that video, and I don't know if you've asked yourself this, but who inside your department do people listen to? Now, not that they have to listen to, that they actually want to listen to. And why? Okay? So I broke it down into 3 categories, 3 qualities. The first one is leadership. And leadership is a little different than, and I'll get into that here in a second, but leadership is a little different than what we are all accustomed to. But it's leadership, communication, and connecting. And so in that book is the 10 traits of what make a VIP, a very influential person. Not important, but influential. Okay? There's 10 traits, but there's 3 qualities. And those leadership is one. Now, if you're reading John Maxwell books, and I do, I'm an avid, a student of John Maxwell. He will say that leadership is influence, nothing more, nothing less. And he actually uses an example, a little quote. I want to say it was in Proverbs, a little quote that says, if you think you're a leader, but you have no followers, you're only taking a walk. Okay. And one of the great example of this is King of the Mountain. As a leader, and I've been in the same situation, and I'll go back to the military again. A lot of those guys, you follow them because you have to. You do what you're told, nothing more, nothing less, boom, you do what you're told. So you think that's the way you have to be a leader. And unfortunately, what you find is a guy gets to that, I'll call it rank. A guy gets to that rank or that seniority, and he's saying, you do this, you do that, you do that. I want you guys to come with me, and I'm going to do this, and we're going to do that. And his famous quote is, yeah, man, it's lonely at the top. Well, if it's lonely at the top, you're not doing something right. You're not a leader. Okay? You're a hiker if you're at the top of that mountain without anybody. Because in order to be a leader, you have to have influence. And you have to help your people. There was a guy that a great quote, I use quotes a lot. Great quote by a salesperson named Zig Ziglar. Okay? And I live by this rule. I've lived by this rule for many, many years. And he says, if you can get You can get everything you want in life as long as you help enough other people get what they want. We have a lot of people across the country that like to step on people on their way up. Okay? That's what they call a positional leader. And if you get a chance to read Maxwell's book on the 5 levels of leadership, I would recommend you do that. The first level is positional leadership. That's where people have to follow you. And most of us believe that's what we have to do. But then the second, you have 5 of these. The second one is permissional. You have permission. People want to follow you because they have a relationship with you. And they trust you. You know, I was watching the movie the other night, and I'm not going to spoil this for you, but I was watching the movie 12 Strong. Great movie. But one thing that I really got out of that, you have these 12 guys that are doing this incredible feat. The leader of those 12 was a new lieutenant with no battle experience. The other 11 had been in battles before and had actually killed people. Okay? Why would they follow him? I mean, they had to, but when it hits the fan, this guy has to be influential enough and proven himself enough. And it's character. It's the different things that they've been through with him, they knew he could carry them through. And they wanted to follow him. And most of those tiny battles that they fought overseas, they volunteered to help him. He didn't order them to help him. If you watch that movie, it's kind of a different way of thinking. And I really think this is something that we need to take a look at through this entire fire service. Not just day-to-day operations, but it's community leaders. It's future leaders. So the second thing is communication. Communicating effectively. Okay? Now this one, how many times have we been at the table, the kitchen table, inside the firehouse? You just get back from vacation. And you had probably one of the best vacations ever. You had a family, everybody, you come back, you're all tan, everything went great. You walk in the firehouse, your buddy's sitting there, and everybody's drinking coffee, and they say, man, Brian, you look like so refreshed. Man, you must have had a great vacation. Oh, yeah, man. You know, when we got off that plane, we hit Orlando, or we hit Fort Myers, or we hit the beach, and right before you start saying it, Topper comes in the room. Okay? Plenty of them. Topper comes in the room and starts telling you about his vacation about 15 years ago. Okay? After you've talked about that for 45 minutes, nobody really cares about your vacation anymore. And we all know that's true. We all know that's true. The toppers are the stoppers when it comes to communication. All right? And I want to tell you 2 things to learn to communicate. It's hard to condense this whole book into a short speech, but 2 things to remember when it comes to communicating. And that is, the first one is listening. It actually doesn't have anything to do with you talking. The number 1 rule with communicating with anybody is it's not about you. When I go across this country and I talk to, we have reps across the country, we have firefighters, police officers, sheriffs, correctional guys. I'm listening to them. And they're telling you what their problems are. They're telling you what they need. What can we fix? That's the biggest thing, is listening. The other thing is, after you actually listen, is to ask them questions about it. Not you. If you sit there and you're waiting and you're listening to them, but you're just waiting for them to take a breath so you can tell them what you think, that's not communicating. You need to dig deep and start asking them questions That's a big challenge. And I really challenge you this week, if not today, when you're networking with people. Because that's the next step, is the connecting. But when you're really wanting to communicate, to connect, you have to take you out of the picture. Because it is all about them when you're connecting with people. How many people in this room love talking about themselves? Everybody. Everybody loves seeing themselves in print. That's why we take pictures and put it in the magazine every quarter. Okay? We all like talking about ourselves. But if you want to connect with people, you have to talk to them. You have to ask them questions. Okay? Another bullet point with communication. So, a few years ago, probably 4 or 5 years ago, I'm traveling around the Dayton, Ohio area, stopping in different firehouses, taking care of guys with their injuries, and taking care of a lot of guys throughout the outskirts of the Dayton city of Dayton. And the crazy thing with this area is there's so many part-time firefighters. There are so many part-time. In Indiana, we don't have that many. Over here, that's one thing I noticed 10 years ago. There was a crazy amount of part-time. They work 3 and 4 jobs at the same time, no health benefits, and they work more than a full-time guy, trying to get a full-time job. And so, but in saying that, when you stop at different firehouses over the course of a year, you might see the same person 0 times, but you might see that same person about every firehouse you stop at. And there just happens to be somebody, and I'm glad he's not in this room right now. I'm not going to mention his name, but he knows who he is. It's a funny story. Is that over a course of several years, I would run into this guy. It's kind of like one of those where you stop at a stop sign, and you always run into the same person. I don't know what it is about that. You could not see 100 people that you know, but there's one person out there that each one of us seem to be, we always run into. This was the guy. And he was probably in his mid-20s at the time. And so every fire station I went to, he looked at me like I was a leper. And I try not to be the insurance agent, okay? Because that's not what we're all about. It's more, we're protected guys. We handle the claims and we handle all that personal stuff. And so I go in, every time I ran into him, he just had this disgruntled look on his face. I mean, just like he was grumpy, like I dated his wife or something. I don't know. It was kind of one of those looks, it was crazy. And so after a few years of this, and he was a member of ours, but after a few years of this, I was on my way home one night, and I just came from his firehouse, one of them that he works at, and I'm like, man, this drives me crazy. What is it? What did I do? I'd like to know, So I pull into a filling station, I call him up, and I finally say, hey, man, this is Brian, I just left the firehouse. And he's like, yeah, Brian. I said, man, I got to ask you, what did I do to make you so mad at me? Because it's like you don't give me the time of day. I mean, you don't even say hi. You got this like old-timer disgruntled look on your face, And he starts laughing, and he says, no, Brian, he goes, you know what? I've had so many guys tell me that I have resting bitch face. He goes, I apologize for that, man. I said, oh, thank goodness. I said, but gosh, you just had me worried about it. And so he said, no, you take care of guys really good, and this, that, and the other. There is verbal, and there is nonverbal forms of communication. That's what you get out of that. The sync that you have to do between what you're saying and how you're looking when you say it. Or when you don't even say anything. If you look at, it's a long name of a professor years ago that had statistics on verbal and nonverbal. And nonverbal, with the way you look, the tone of voice, your body actions, actually was probably 80% of the conversation, and it was only about 20%, if not less, for actually verbal. So it's how you react. It's what you're doing. It's what you think you're not doing. So it's very important. So the two forms of communication, verbal, nonverbal. If you don't know how you look or you want to change resting bitch face, I'd just say, hey, look in the mirror. Okay? And see if you want to talk to that guy. And it's very important. And the other two things is listen and ask questions. Okay? Be genuinely interested in others. And believe me, that is hard to do. There's a certain fire department out there in the United States that I go to, and I struggle at this department because they, for some reason, are so disgruntled. Now, they have a lot of runs. They've had a lot of bad things happen to them. But they just won't communicate with people very well between their verbal and their nonverbal. And I can only imagine how city officials are treated. Okay? So, the third thing that I want to get into is connecting. And that's one of the biggest things. So you have leadership, you have communication, and you have the art of connecting. And without connecting, Nick wouldn't have this room right here, which is awesome. He wouldn't be able to have Sinclair here or some of the vendors over here. He's done one heck of a job, and he's a connector. So, connecting. Years ago, before I got on the fire department, I worked for Cellular One, which actually was out of Dayton, Ohio area, and I worked there for a little while. But I was transferred to the Richmond store when they opened it. And so, I was just an installer. I got out of the military and installed phones in a car it was crazy. I feel like I'm 100 years old. But it's when the cell phones first came out, believe it or not. So I was drilling these things in the car. So there was a temporary person that was hired to answer phones at Cellular One. And I live by that. You help everybody. If you want to get everything you want in life, you help as many people. You help them first. Okay? You give first, and then down the road, it'll come back. So this girl gets hired. She's a temporary from Manpower. And you start communicating. You connect. I didn't date her. Okay? I just want to let you know that for right now. I didn't date her. We communicated. You connect. You build relationships. Okay? And as sure as I'm sitting here, it's crazy to think that was 25 years ago, probably 26 maybe, and she was a temporary answering the phone at Cellular One in Richmond, Indiana. In the last 5-6 years of my career, she sat on city council. That's what I'm getting at. The time to start building relationships is right now, where you're not expecting anything in return. You're just there helping. You're there for them. You build character. It doesn't happen overnight. It happens in little increments. It takes time to build that trust. It's very, very important. One of the people, when I was telling you before, that when I played music at this Chamber of Commerce, one of the people that I would regularly see at a Chamber of Commerce function was a sheriff deputy. And this sheriff deputy actually was a guy that worked part-time selling washing machines at Sears. I met him when I met my wife. It was a great pickup line that I had, by the way, but besides the point. But I met him when I met my wife. Great guy. But I would see him at regular functions. And I kept thinking, man, I can see what they're doing. They're just building relationships. And so I only had a few years on the department, so I go in and I ask, hey, I'd like to represent the fire department. There's nobody from the police department, nobody from the fire department. At a Chamber of Commerce meeting, we have young professionals. I was only about 33 at the time. You have a young professional meeting I've been playing music for. I said, I'd like to set that music aside and just represent the fire department and build some relationships. After I got laughed out of the office because I wasn't in the right position, didn't have the right rank, and didn't have any seniority. Famous last words, get some time. Okay? In the long run, that hurts us. Because the last 10 years of my career, we had 0 raises. Okay? And I keep thinking to myself, did the fires burn different? You know, were they hotter somewhere else? They weren't as hot here. They weren't as dangerous. Or it wasn't because we were less skilled. We attacked fires like crazy. Did people die differently? I mean, we're saving all these people. What was different? And it's the influence that we have in the city with future city leaders. When you hit the positions, it's almost too late. Because the temporary, now she is on city council, but I only have one person of influence up there that I know. And I didn't maintain that, even though she was at all these chamber meetings. She was at all these young professional meetings where I could have been there just building relationships up. Okay? And I can't guarantee that will make a difference in any of your negotiations, but I do know for a fact that I won't harm it. And if we're a business, we have to treat ourselves like a business. So anyway, the sheriff deputy. So he's ending this year on his at least 3rd term as sheriff. And he was at all those chamber meetings. Okay? It just makes sense when you look back on this stuff. We had a 3-term mayor that was a cleaning lady. Great person. What did she have? She didn't have the education. She didn't have any rank. She didn't have any time. She had influence. She knew how to communicate, to connect with the community. That's what she had. And she didn't do it the day before she ran for the election. She established it as a person within that community that cared. And it just makes sense. 3-term mayor, passed away right after she was finished, but she was a great lady. And loved the community members, anybody. Didn't matter what your financial situation was, she would sit there and talk to you. So connecting, if we're going to be a business, that's the way I think. And I think if there's anything within this first morning that I could just kind of make you think a little bit different on, it's learning how to build your influence inside the department, of course, but really outside the department, because that's what impacts our career. When we retire, impacts our career at every negotiation, every wage, every working condition, every disciplinary action. It's all politics. But you have to get and understand that those people in those organizations that we need to go to, we need teams that are designated and to go to those places and just start building relationships. It's kind of funny because I spend a lot of time driving, and I think a lot because I'm going from here to Colorado and Wisconsin down to Tennessee, so I'm driving a lot. But it's when you think about things and you think, man, this seems so easy. But again, we're kind of held by that traditional value of saying, hey, get some time before you go represent us. And the thing that I notice is the amount of energy somebody under 5 years has dude, they're excited about this profession. They're excited about it. They dress nice. They'll do whatever it takes to make that department as good as you can. And you get about 12 to 15 years in, and you start getting disgruntled because of the system. And then guys are like me, and I was fortunate enough I left at 20 years. Because when I would go on to a run, I would go on fire run, medical run, any run with another guy. We were on heavy rescue. And I got to the point where I didn't feel like I was a nice guy anymore. I was like, are you kidding me? This same guy's calling again? Gosh. These guys under 5 years, they don't really, in mine or somebody that has time, somebody that's about ready to retire. But believe me, a little by little, it takes time to build trust. It takes time to build integrity, character. And I just think that we need to start building the business of the